Thank you, Yoko. And thank you to the conference organizers. Merci beaucoup. I know these events are a huge amount of work to pull together, and it seems pretty straightforward. People come up, deliver a PowerPoint, but there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. So thank you so much to Pathways to Prosperity and the co-chairs for that. My presentation today is maybe a little bit grandiose, turning the tide on demographic and labor market decline. How social innovation labs are introducing user-centered design, systems thinking, and experimentation to improve settlement integration and retention outcomes in New Brunswick. And I should say a couple disclaimers. First off, this is not a substitute or an alternative to traditional program evaluation. There's lots of good discussion from Alex and Tracy about how do we evaluate these programs that we're funding and putting huge investments into. That work is extremely important. This is a different piece. This is almost a separate space, if you will, for different type of work and different type of evaluation. Also, it's a relatively new initiative. We've started this work in New Brunswick. I guess it officially was announced in April, and we've started a lab cycle. We have 40 participants that started in September, but it's still very new, and they're in the middle of an early process. So, as was mentioned, I work for the New Brunswick, well, I don't know if it was mentioned. I work for the New Brunswick Multicultural Council. We are the provincial umbrella organization for all settlement service providers in New Brunswick. Several of our members are here in the room today, and you probably know many of them. And we were founded in 1983 as the provincial voice, to be the provincial voice on cultural diversity, multiculturalism, immigration settlement. Here's a map quickly of our member organizations around New Brunswick. 13 settlement service providers and 3 provincial ethno-cultural organizations make up our membership. We cover all regions, but we don't have offices in all communities where there are newcomers coming. So we cover the regions, but we don't necessarily have bricks and mortar in all areas. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, well, essentially an organization that was created in New Brunswick about 2 years ago, New Lab. The logo you see on the top there is Pondesh Pandey Center. They are Entrepreneurship and Social Enterprise Center at the University of New Brunswick. And they partnered with the New Brunswick Social Policy Research Network, which is essentially a network of 3 sectors, 3 broad sectors: academia, public sector, and community organizations. And what the Social Policy Research Network aimed to do was build bridges so that we could leverage research capacity in universities to inform policy and community service delivery, which I'm sure would resonate because this forum is doing precisely that. So these 2 organizations came together and created New Lab. And New Lab is described as, by the director of New Lab, we help the public and innovators act together to address our most pressing social, environmental, and economic challenges by connecting change agents from across sectors, convening them around pressing issues, and facilitating their journey to deep change. New Lab is making the change process smarter. And I'll talk a little bit about how they're doing that. I'm just throwing this up as a reference. You may see some familiar logos here, depending on where you are in the country and what work you're involved with. These are existing labs, Mars Solutions Labs based in Toronto out of Mars Discovery District, Natural Steps based in Western Canada, and they're convening labs, social labs around energy, in Alberta, around housing, around a range of different issues. GovLabs based out of New York City, and Rollers Strategies is based out of the UK. These are all kind of established social innovation hubs that have helped New Lab along the process to build their capacity to learn about this emerging methodology and approach to social innovation, systems change. So we're connected to a network and a good peer system. So what are the demographic and labor market challenges in New Brunswick? Some of this may be beating a dead horse for you, but I'm still going to get into it. New Brunswick's labor market is shrinking. We're the only province in Canada to decline in population between 2011 and 2016. This was kind of a dubious category to be first in, but and actually Alex in Ontario mentioned that he was aware of this, but it's something we're acutely aware of in New Brunswick. You may not be aware of it in other provinces, but it's something we're feeling very deeply and seriously in New Brunswick. We're tied for the highest median age across Canada, so we're the oldest population in the country. And we're expecting 110,000 permanent exits from our labor market over the next 10 years. Now that may not seem like a lot depending on the size of your labor market in your province, but for us that represents a third of our entire labor force exiting over the next 10 years. So quite dramatic. Now, to add on to that, we welcomed 9,330 newcomers to New Brunswick over the past 5 years, with a retention rate of roughly 70%. David Campbell, our former chief economist for the government of New Brunswick, describes this as one of the biggest public policy challenges of our time in New Brunswick. How do we attract and retain 150,000 immigrants over the next 20 years? This is the scale of transformation of system change that we're looking at in New Brunswick. 4.6% of our residents in our province were born outside of Canada, contrasted with 21.9% across the country. And 98% of everyone living in northeastern New Brunswick is at least third-generation Canadian. 92% across the province. And we have 44% to compare with in Montreal and 22% in Toronto. But you can imagine that when you're bringing new people and new cultures and new perspectives into those communities, it's a dramatic change. It's something that you have to bring people along in. It's not something that you can, and I think the comments this morning were very timely. This is a big undertaking, but we have to bring people along with us. We also, in the Atlantic region, I'm sure you've heard talk about it over the past couple of days, we have the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program. And Tracy mentioned this as well. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the pilot program, but there's also going to be some challenges because we're breaking new ground with this initiative. It's an employer-driven immigration program that requires employers to play a larger role upfront in terms of paperwork and recruiting internationally, and downstream in terms of investing in settlement and for the employee and their family. Immigration is relatively new to many of the employers coming forward to participate. So the paperwork's new, hiring foreign talent is new, all of this is very new to them. And they're nervous about how to recruit, integrate, retain newcomers. It's a big investment. I want it to be successful. I want to do my part. I want to do my due diligence. But a bit daunting for some employers. Employers are also coming forward in rural areas with little immigration experience. There's no bricks and mortar services in some of the communities that employers are coming forward in. So we've actually seen some employers hire their own settlement worker. Irving, JDI Woodlands Division has hired their own settlement worker, and in Edmundston there's a chicken hatchery that's bringing in a number of workers, and they're also hiring a settlement worker as an employer. So interesting, but still new. Those employers need a lot of support. Those new hires, those settlement workers with employers will need some training and coaching from the expertise that already exists. So complex and large-scale challenges ahead for New Brunswick, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Social Innovation Lab and I guess why we're investing in this. So Zaid Hassan, who's the author of the Social Labs Revolution, describes labs as follows: bringing together diverse, committed team and taking an experimental, prototyping-based approach to addressing challenges systemically, that is at root cause level. So really looking at and when we talk about outcomes, looking at what are the root causes and what are the root interventions, or the interventions that are going to get at those root issues. This lab work is a coalition, if you will. It's not one organization. It's not the Multicultural Council, and really it's not New Lab. It's a coalition of organizations in New Brunswick that are taking this issue very seriously. And it started at an information session 2 years ago in the New Brunswick Business Council, the CEO and president of the Business Council, which represents 25, I think, large heritage companies in New Brunswick, big employers, big economic footprint. And I was at the same session, and they were explaining labs and how this might be an approach that could help us address some of the complex issues in New Brunswick around literacy, housing, obesity, and immigration. And so they asked people in the room to write down on a piece of paper what they thought the most pressing challenge was for the province. And as it happened, I wrote down on my paper immigration, and so did the CEO and president of the Business Council. So we stood up and we were holding these papers, and we kind of saw each other across the room, and I guess the rest is history. So now we engaged the government of New Brunswick, Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, and we have some people representing ACOA here. The city of Moncton is represented on our leadership council, Angelique Reddy-Kalala, who has a huge amount of experience and is doing incredible work in Moncton. She's, I'm sure you're familiar with Angelique. The Conseil économique de Nouveau-Brunswick, which is like a chamber of sorts for francophone enterprises across New Brunswick. And l'Association francophone des municipalités de Nouveau-Brunswick, so the Association of Francophone Municipalities. All these organizations came together to help seed this and get it going and engage people in this work. It wouldn't happen if it was a top-down approach or a government-led initiative. This is really a shared ownership model. We have private sector, we have community organizations, and we have government all at the table helping to invest in this process. And the overarching question, bold and aspirational, is how might we become leaders at attracting, welcoming, and retaining newcomers to contribute to the economy of New Brunswick? So this is the question that guides the work, the vision, the larger vision, and obviously there's a lot of nuances there. Who's participating? We have a total of 40 participants right now in the lab, and the lab is running in cycles. We're running 4-month cycles where people start and they go through a process of learning about hard skills related to social innovation, research and development, user-centered design, systems thinking, and then gradually over the course of the workshops are scoping down and saying, okay, well, what's my prototype? What's the thing I'm going to test to make a difference in this problem area? We have 11 government reps, 6 from a settlement sector, 7 from academic, and you can read the numbers, I suppose. But also important to note, participants with immigrant experience, 30% of the people involved in the lab have immigrant experience. So we're not forgetting that important voice through the process. This is a quick look at what the cycle looks like. We start with a 3-day workshop. It's quite an intensive schedule, more or less 10 days over the course of 4 months. It's a huge investment of time, but important to take that deep dive and not kind of, we attend lots of conferences and a lot of workshops and a lot of consultations, but often we kind of, our wheels touch down and then we're back in the air and back into our day jobs. So this work is meant to really plant our feet and get and dig into some of these core issues. Essentially what happens in the lab is we're gathering multi-stakeholder teams, applying systems thinking, applying design thinking, and prototyping and testing solutions to address complex problems. And this is, I guess, a simplistic kind of description. So what is systems thinking? It's a process or procedure that helps guide people to discover and understand the initiating causes of a problem, so the root causes, with the goal of determining missing or inadequately applied controls that will prevent recurrence. So this is, again, kind of just a snapshot of what we're looking at, but what are the root causes? How do we understand and observe our system? What is design thinking? It's a human-centered approach to innovation that integrates the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success or for service success. And what is prototyping? It's the design of a working model of a product or service that can be used to test out the reactions of potential clients. So rather than designing a program and rolling it out on a large scale, taking the time to test some of these theories and these assumptions with a smaller scale prototype. It doesn't always result in concrete product or service, but it reveals important questions, dilemmas, controversies, and opportunities in the design process. So current focus areas for the prototyping, as I mentioned, there's 40 people, there's 8 teams now, and they're scoping down into problem areas. These are the things that they've landed on, and they're still kind of dialing in and getting more I guess, surgical about these questions, but helping employers initiate international hiring process. As I mentioned, the pilot has a lot of employers coming forward that are new to this. Helping immigrant entrepreneurs from the provincial nominee program develop a voice and influence through forming an organization. They want to test whether, similar to the mention earlier this morning about an association for refugees, where refugees are expressing their own voice, looking at creating a similar organization for business immigrants. And helping newcomer spouses create meaningful relationship outside of their community. I'm going to cruise through this, but the presentation will be shared after. I just want to get to a couple points at the end here. 3 ways the lab, I think, could impact measurement and client outcomes. One is that we're creating the tools, we're giving the time, and we're providing training to settlement agencies and partners in research and development. There are hard skills associated with research and development. The private sector uses rigor, they dedicate significant resources to research and development, and we don't do the same thing in social sector. And government certainly doesn't do the same thing because the resources aren't there. These are seen as bloat. They're seen as unnecessary. They're not associated with direct client service. So actually, in a conversation with IRCC official recently, they said the settlement sector really doesn't have this capacity because when we fund agreements, we see it as admin, it's heavy on the admin, and we don't give them the time to do work unrelated to projects, and do that creative partnership building, the exploring questions, developing new services. The project design and measurement approach, so we're getting real-time feedback from this prototyping experience. We're not running in 3-year cycles where we fund these things, we evaluate it, and then in 3 years we look at it and see if it worked. We're evaluating it as we go and using the user's experience to help inform that evaluation. And the multi-stakeholder team approach is critical because when we have, first of all, we're not developing services that, or we're not developing prototypes that relate directly to my day job. The prototype might be outside of my day job. We've got people from policy shops, people from academia, people from service providers, employers collaborating around prototypes that might be outside of the scope of their day job or their job description. But their expertise and their experience from their day job helps to inform that prototype and enriches the experience. So that's it. If you're interested in following the Economic Immigration Lab, we've got a website, everything that's done, all the presentations, all the documentation, testimonials, everything is shared online at economicimmigrationlab.org. So thank you very much, and sorry for going over time.
No worries. Thank you.